Hello, my name is Shawn Wells, and I'm a registered dietitian, certified sports nutritionist, fellow in the ISSN. I have my master's in nutritional biochemistry. I've been a chief clinical dietitian in hospitals for about a decade of my life, and then I became a formulator for many dietary supplement companies. For Dymatize, BioTrust. I worked with a number of companies throughout the industry. And so I'm known as the world's greatest formulator. But I do love all things biohacking. I've been keto for about 20 years, on and off. I got into it with Lyle McDonald and Dan Duchesne with their body composition stuff. And I thought that was very cool at the time. And obviously a lot more data has come out more recently with a number of therapeutic conditions that definitely have my interest. So the overview of my talk, why am I keto? The myth of bad fat. Do we even need carbohydrates? What is ketogenic dieting? The risks of ketogenic dieting? And the benefits of ketogenic dieting. I'm just guessing, like, how many people here are keto? Is everyone? Okay. Like all the time? Like how many people like CKD? Maybe cyclical ketogenic dieting? Yeah? Targeted? Anyone use like carbs before a workout? No? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I don't know if you guys have caught this on Facebook. Maybe your friends threw this at you, and this is very frustrating to me, both of these things. These are both in the last few weeks. Jillian Michaels on keto with Steve Harvey saying it's dangerous, you can't be on it, it's not something you want to do long term. And then this other one in Popular Science came out maybe a week ago, and yeah, June 8th. And sorry, keto fans, you're probably not in ketosis. I don't know if you guys read this article or, again, had friends send it to you. But there was so much misinformation in it. It was so frustrating. Comparing, which I'll get into later, ketosis with ketoacidosis and saying it'll leach calcium from your bones. It's dangerous. It's acidic. You know, don't be on this diet. And all of this stuff is so frustrating to me. So one of the reasons I like talking about keto, I go on podcasts and radio shows and I travel to Brazil and all these different places, is because there's so much misinformation. And as much good stuff is coming out about keto, there's all this kind of stuff because it's all clickbait now, right? So it's very frustrating, and I want to give you all the real truth so that you can, one, know it for yourselves, but tell your friends to, shut the front door. So why am I keto? This is another reason beyond my just desire to help people and stop the misinformation is I have something called a pituitary adenoma. And it's basically a brain tumor in my head. It's a benign one, benign meaning not cancerous, but it's had all kinds of impact on my health. My testosterone was through the floor, my estrogen and prolactin were through the roof. I was getting depressed, I was getting skinny fat, all kinds of issues with my sleep. And so keto has helped me in a number of ways achieve optimal health and with the things I have. But another concern for me is that I'm at high risk for real cancer now that I have this pituitary adenoma. So I want to minimize my risks as much as possible. So this is a passion for me. Ansel Keys, you guys know Ansel Keys? Yeah? Yes, so he deservedly has gotten a lot of crap. Saturated fat, cholesterol, we know all this stuff is bunk, right? I mean, if I was to tell you that an animal eating another animal is going to get sick and heart attacks, does that make sense? I mean, what's changed in the last 50 years? It's not us eating more or less fat. It's like the processed food, right? There wasn't like artificial colors, flavors, sweeteners. There wasn't RBGH, RBST. There wasn't antibiotics. There wasn't ultra-processed food. All this stuff didn't exist. That's what's changed. And so with these low-fat recommendations, were they the answer? And if you look at these, this is where the low-fat guidelines were. And look at where we're at now with obesity. But it gets worse if I show you this. These are the obesity trends from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control down in Atlanta. And you see this is less than 10% obesity, that's over 30 BMI. Less than 10%, 10 to 14%. How bad do you think this gets over like the next 30 years? This, like, no matter how bad you think it's going to get, it's going to shock you at how bad this gets. This is every 5 years. These red states, these deep red states are over 35%. This is 5 years ago. So this is the trend. I mean, look, there's not even a state out there that's less than 15 to 20 now. So we're facing an epidemic. It's really, and our epidemic is spreading out worldwide to be a pandemic. And this is all in the midst of low-fat recommendations and low-fat being heart healthy. When that recommendation was made, there was less than 10% obesity in the US. And now, less than 10% overweight or obese. And now we're at 75% of the population. And I don't know if that shocks you or not, but that's where our healthcare is at right now. And that is shocking. And obviously, you know, with obesity goes diabetes, right? I mean, literally hand in hand. These lines are pretty much deeply correlated to each other. So you're seeing the population, as it gets more obese, we're getting more diabetic. And you know, almost every chronic disease is correlated to high blood glucose. Because with high blood glucose comes elevated insulin and all these disease conditions. And really, if I was to tell you like the two lab markers that you guys should look at and track for your health, super simple, and doctors don't do it. Hemoglobin A1C for blood sugar, like seeing a long-term indicator of blood sugar, not glucose, which is too transient. But also CRP for inflammation, because almost every chronic disease has glycation and inflammation. But we don't look at them, and it would be a great way to predict our risk for disease, but we're not doing that right now. What's up, Ryan? So another place I go to quite a bit, Brazil, we're seeing Brazil is expected to have the 4th highest increase in diabetes between 2012 and 2030. This is what I'm saying, this pandemic is spreading from the United States outwards. And this is a country that's known for physical fitness, nutrition, health. But our eating habits are spreading. And insulin, you guys know, obviously you hear about insulin all the time, and you know, one thing that's super frustrating, Ryan and I have talked about this, is that type 2 diabetes, it's now called type 2 diabetes. You know what it used to be called? There's 2 names for it. Adult onset diabetes or non-insulin dependent diabetes, right? They can't use those terms anymore because kids have it and people are using insulin. And then there's some cases where kids are using insulin that have type 2 diabetes. It's crazy. And they don't need to use insulin. They just need to exercise and eat right. So you see with the high carbohydrate diet, you keep insulin elevated, and you have you reduce insulin sensitivity and you get insulin resistance. And then when you have chronically elevated insulin, that's when you run into these conditions with many of these diseases. And then you're also inhibiting lipolysis when insulin's elevated, lipolysis being the breakdown of fat. So, dietary fat wasn't the culprit. What was it? And you guys know a lot of this, so I'll go through this quickly. But there's nomadic cultures. You know, the Native Americans, physically fit, peak shape. They were eating buffalo mostly. We know about the Inuits. We know about Eskimos. And all these people that tell you about cholesterol, Eskimos have a typical cholesterol of 600. 600, and almost zero incidence of myocardial infarction, heart attacks. We've been lied to about cholesterol. There is one subfraction that's correlated, and it's not just LDL. LDL is actually healthy, but it's the very low density lipoprotein. It's not the large fluffy LDL. So sometimes you can be on the ketogenic diet, your LDL can go up. It's not accurate enough. You guys need to look at a VAP test or an NMR test. These are some of the best athletes in the world, these sled dogs. 1,600-kilometer race. I mean, seriously, they're in amazing shape, in a shape that no human could ever get in. And in this study, they had far better performance with high-fat, meat-based diets than carb diets. That makes sense. So I'm a registered dietitian, and this is my organization, unfortunately. I'm often frustrated with their stances, but the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they used to be the ADA, now it's the A&D. They switched their stance on a lot of these things, and I give them a lot of credit. So cholesterol, fat, saturated fat, they used to be bad. Now they're flipping their stance. And really the only holdout at this point is the American Heart Association, which I'm sure you guys have all heard, like their stance on saturated fat, coconut oil, all these things in the media that are super frustrating for us as a keto community, right? And you know that's bunk. You know it is. But they're holding on because they get a lot of funding, right? They get a lot of funding. And they don't want to switch their stance. And I think it's going to be a while before the American Heart Association flips where they're coming from. So they hold on to this high-fat diet thing being bad, right? And we see studies that say high-fat diets are bad. What do you guys think about when you hear that, oh, there's some studies saying a high-fat diet is bad? Do you know that typically, if that is even the case, that it's a high-fat, high-carb diet, right? And you got to tell people that when they say, oh, I saw a study, a high-fat diet's bad. Well, is it like with these animal models, they're on high-fructose corn syrup and vegetable oils. Inflammatory vegetable oils and high glycemic carbohydrate. Wow, surprise, it's not healthy. It's basically like the McDonald's diet or something like that, right? So that's not indicative of a ketogenic diet, a very low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Because we know when you consume these two things together that you have insulin elevated and you inhibit lipolysis. You stop breaking down fat. So you don't want to have a situation where you're having high carb, high glycemic carb especially, along with high fat. Here's another point of contention that you might hear that gets confusing is low carb ketogenic, right? They're the same thing. Everyone thinks they're the same thing. You know, Atkins, it's the same, or I eat low carb. There's no like precise definition for low carb. Some people say it's as high as 50%. A lot of studies, it's 30%. You know, it's very unclear what it means. And we know there's no deficiency, right? There's no minimum RDA for carbs. But a very low calorie or very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet is less than 50 grams a day and less than 5% of calories. Atkins is really, here's another difference, Atkins is unlimited protein and ketogenic diets are less than 25%. Because we worry about gluconeogenesis, right? So here it is broken out. You guys know these numbers. This is what it takes to promote ketosis. So one thing I would say is a lot of people quibble over this one. I would say, and I've talked to Ryan about this, is that I think the more muscle mass you have, the more capacity for protein allowance you can potentially have. I've seen that, and same with carbs too. With carbs, I have a friend, Lawrence Ballinger, who's a bodybuilder. big guy, 280 pounds, he can probably have about 100 grams of carbohydrates a day and stay in ketosis. People that are more athletic, they can have 75% or 75 grams. The typical is like 50, but it just depends. And some women that might have like less lean body mass, I've seen like their allowance, their area to stay in ketosis is often less. So sometimes they're getting at 30 and they're like, I'm getting kicked out of ketosis. And I think a lot of it is actually related to lean body mass and the GLUT4 translocation of glucose, using glycogen, all that stuff. So you guys know the history of the diet, I'm sure. It was super effective for epilepsy, and it lost its popularity, unfortunately, with the drugs that are super harsh, and that's very frustrating. You guys probably know, I know the Charlie Foundation is downstairs, right? That was an amazing story that their son had epilepsy, Charlie, and he got on the ketogenic diet and was free from grand mal seizures, didn't have any more seizures. And actually, an interesting part of the story is that 2 years in, he stopped doing the diet and he stopped having seizures ever again. So it's not just directly therapeutic. Maybe in some cases it hits some reset button. And I don't know the science to that, but that's very interesting. So ketosis, again, I think you guys know this, and this is a graph of a 40-day fast. You're seeing ketones get elevated, and those are replacing blood glucose as fuel. Free fatty acids stay kind of at a basal level, but you're seeing glucose go down and ketones go up. And the brain and the central nervous system do rely on glucose, and you hear that all the time. But without carbs, the brain and the CNS, they won't use, I shouldn't say can't use, they won't use glucose or fat. The body is forced to find an alternative energy source, and that's going to be ketones. And so we see here that ketones are a great energy source. They're upregulated two ways: ketosis, a ketogenic diet with severe carbohydrate restriction, and fasting. And certainly we're seeing benefit by using both together. And the ketogenic diet shifts the body from being a carb burner to a fat burning machine. And not only is it great fuel for the brain, but we're seeing that it can be used in skeletal muscle, heart muscle, and a number of tissues. So Zach Bitter is a friend of mine, and this is impressive too. The American record holder, and he eats almost no carbs. 100 miles ultra endurance. And if I was to tell you this 10 years ago when people were doing carb loading and spaghetti and bagels and goos and gels and Gatorade and all these things that you think are so necessary, is it? Because that's not the case. He's the record holder. And this is, again, we're seeing a shift in the paradigm of what's really real for performance. And so which is the better fuel? This is a 65 kilogram runner, 10% body fat, which is very lean. So you have about, at this level, you have about 1,000 to 2,000 calories stored on your muscle glycogen. This guy, again, lean, 50,000 calories stored on him as adipose. So which source would you rather tap into? And if you think about the stuff that they run into with just holding these things, finding these things, running with these things, GI distress, all this stuff, it becomes a lot easier if you're using fat for fuel that you have on you, right? So with studies, why is there debate? We've seen some studies that say ketogenic diet, decline in performance, right? That there's a decline in this time to exhaustion, right? That it's not as good. But the problem is, you're looking at, 1 week there's a declination in performance. But what do you see at 6 weeks? Improved performance from baseline. Again, we're not getting told this, and studies aren't doing this well. Ryan and his lab, Dr. Jacob Wilson, Ryan Lowry, they always keto adapt. And that's what a good study should do. So again, if you see a decline in performance, the first thing I would say with that study, if you were asking questions, is did they keto adapt? So these are the things that you often hear about, and people say, I don't want to do the diet because of those things, right? So what should you do? And I will say another thing, if this comes up, typically I find that this is people not doing high enough fat and doing too much protein, essentially doing Atkins. And you kind of stay in this hangry state because you're gluconeogenic, and even just minor shifts in blood glucose feel like major shifts if you're a carb eater. So just, a drop in 10 points, you can feel hangry. And this would be like similar to like a drop in 50 points if you were a carb eater. So if you're always eating just protein, I think you kind of fall into this. You're not really efficient at ketones, you're not really efficient at glucose, you're just kind of stuck in this neither world. And it's just not very efficient. So I would recommend typically that you look at their diet and tell them to up their fat, lower protein. And then there's the whole net carbs thing too, but that's another discussion. So managing keto symptoms, headache, water electrolytes, constipation, doing fiber, hunger, add fat, like I said. Fat's obviously very satiating. Brain fog, supplemental ketones or MCTs. I really like the C8, the caprylic acid. It's about 3 times better at raising ketones than typical MCTs. And so going back to that article at the beginning and all this noise that we're hearing that's super frustrating, I've been in the clinical realm, and you would always hear when you talk about ketoacidosis, it's dangerous, it's dangerous. You can tell them that it's a 10 to 50-fold difference, right? So this is blood BHB, and nutritional ketosis starts at a threshold of like 0.5. And maybe like, you can actually go up to maybe like 7, possibly with like deep fasting. But 15 to 25 is where ketoacidosis is. And the only way you get into diabetic ketoacidosis is type 1 diabetic. It doesn't produce insulin. So this isn't relevant. This is a very frustrating argument that you have to hear over and over. Another thing that you hear in these noisy articles and from people, is it safe? Like, yeah, it's cool to do for a crash diet, but it's not very safe. And then you can point out to, there's the Inuits and there's epileptic people. And I think we're going to move beyond that as we have whole populations that are doing this now for long term. And certainly, like I said, I've done it for many decades. But this study is a great one, 6 months. And look at all this stuff. These are obese people. Significant decrease in weight, improvements in cholesterol, decrease in triglycerides, significant decrease in blood glucose. Looks pretty safe. Looks like all ideal outcomes, right? So it's frustrating that there's so many people that need this diet that aren't getting this diet because of fear-mongering, right? Saying it's unsafe, saying it's going to make your blood acidic, all this stuff. And really frustrating to me is most of them are dietitians in these articles saying this stuff. So it makes me frustrated to be a dietitian. But here's another one. So why not use low fat? We always hear low fat's heart healthy, especially from, like I said, the American Heart Association. But if you look at different populations, and this is where I make the argument, yeah, maybe like, let's say 20 to 30% of the population is very insulin sensitive. They can eat whatever they want. It's great. And they talk about calories in, calories out, if it fits your macros, anything works for me, I'm a bodybuilder, blah, 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 I don't need keto, great. Like there are those people. But that's not everyone. And most of us are insulin resistant. We're on our way, we're pre-diabetic, we're diabetic, we're on our way to insulin resistance. Do you remember being a kid and having like candy and being crazy? Like, you know, your parents be like, oh my God, why are they so crazy? Right? And now when you have soda, you have carbs, you're like, it's insulin resistance. So what happens here, we see that low-fat diet is very ineffective for insulin resistance. Low-carb diet, ketogenic diet, very effective, about 3 times better. So which one should we be recommending? You saw 3 out of the 4 people in America are obese or overweight, right? So why go keto and not low-carb? Besides the whole hangry thing that I mentioned, this is a good study, isocaloric and isoprotein, meaning stable levels of all those in all 3 groups. And we see this is weight loss, this is muscle, and this is fat. So with 104 grams, which is low carb, there's 25% of the weight loss was muscle. That's something we don't want to lose, right? When we start lowering carbs, 15% of muscle. 30 grams, only 5%. So really, the lower carb we go, the more muscle sparing it is. And that's because ketones are higher. And we know that ketones in the blood are muscle sparing, right? So low carb doesn't equal keto power. This outlines that too, essentially that, and this is a ketogenic.com slide. And you see that as the ketone levels go higher, fat lost goes higher as well, and that's ideal. So the benefits of keto. So 5 reasons to go keto. I'm curious, like how many people see enhanced brain function? Yeah, that's awesome. That is really awesome. So, and they'll tell you, like most people are telling you, like you don't see those things, that you're just in a brain fog. And it's because people aren't committing to it, right? They're not adapting. They're not doing higher fat. They're kind of in, they're out. They're doing net carbs, all these things. Like, and it's frustrating to talk to these people and knowing they're not getting to this state. And especially if you add fasting in, I feel like low carb plus fasting is actually better than just a nutritional ketogenic diet, because fasting is just so powerful. Now, if you add the 2 together, that's like the best of both worlds, for sure. This is interesting with athletes looking at fat oxidation, so being a fat burner. And this is grams of fat per hour. So what's really interesting here is the highest participant in the glucogenic crowd is still lower than the lowest participant in the keto-adapted crowd. And if you look at the averages, there's a 3x difference of the keto-adapted versus the non-keto-adapted. So when you become keto-adapted, you become an awesome fat burner. Really great. And it's great to use that fuel like we talked about. It has more than twice the caloric density in each gram of fat, right? And optimizing body composition. This is fascinating as well. This is from Dr. Volek. There's 4 groups: low fat, low carb, and then without exercise and with exercise, right? So look at low fat, the worst change in percent body fat. Low carb is the same as low fat plus resistance training. And then obviously, like I said, you combine these two, and that's 50% better than these 2 groups. But the fascinating thing here is, how many people do you know that can't exercise? Maybe are elderly or morbidly obese. What diet should they be on? Well, it's just as good as low fat and resistance training without even working out. I would say this one. Now, if they can work out, that's great. So ketones can spare muscle, like we talked about. And we know that ketones are leucine sparing as well. And you guys all know what leucine is, the branched chain amino acid. It's the key amino acid that triggers muscle protein synthesis, anabolism, the accretion of lean body mass. So it's very important. And we know that ketones are, 1, anti-catabolic, so they spare lean body mass. And we always hear this concern about protein is too low on the ketogenic diet. This is the reason why this works. That you don't need to have a ton of protein. I think because of insulin sensitivity and because it's leucine sparing, your threshold for protein is much lower. So let's say on a regular carb-based diet, maybe it's 2.5 to 3.5 grams of leucine that you would need to optimize muscle protein synthesis, which is, let's say, 25 to 35 grams of whey protein. But on a ketogenic diet, it might be half that. We don't have the data yet. Hopefully, Dr. Ryan Lowry, that's somewhere he might go. I'd love to see that data. But this does happen. So like if you look at like the young children that are like constantly anabolic, their threshold for leucine sensitivity is they're extremely leucine sensitive. So that means that they need very little leucine to trigger muscle protein synthesis. And then we see as we get older and we become more insulin resistant, more sedentary, our leucine sensitivity goes way down. And then we get something called sarcopenic obesity, where we're trading off muscle mass for fat mass, right? And so that level might be 5 grams, might be 6 grams, 7 grams, especially if you're immunocompromised in a nursing home. You may never optimally trigger muscle protein synthesis, and then you're set up for losing that muscle mass, sarcopenia. So, Dr. Jacob Wilson last year published a study that does show you can gain muscle. And they were resistance trained. They made just the same gains on keto as the Western diet group. The only difference, they didn't gain much fat. They lost fat. Which one do you want to be on? And you hear all this stuff. Oh, you can't gain muscle. You can't do that. I've done pretty well. And I'm 44, and I'm still working out, and I've gained mass. So I think it works for me. But this data shows that it's bigger than my anecdotal evidence. And then we're also seeing, this is from Dr. Roberts, that it's possibly, like I was talking about, not only anti-catabolic, but anabolic, that BHB, the key ketone, is potentially anabolic. We need human data on this, but most likely it would carry over. So effects on strength and power. That's great that body composition is improved, that you can gain lean body mass, but what about some athletic variables? Well, in this study by McCleary, we see that both groups, upper body strength increased, lower body strength increased, wingate peak power increased. The conclusion, we were able to demonstrate that a ketogenic diet can produce similar strength and power gains to a Western diet. So again, we're seeing no differences. But what about CrossFit? It's glycolytic, right? It's not anaerobic. It's going to be a whole different scenario. And there's been 2 keto and CrossFit studies. But this one, no difference in lean mass between the groups, significantly decreased body weight, significantly decreased fat mass, and improved body fat percentage. And the conclusion, the ketogenic diet combined with 6 weeks of CrossFit training can lead to significant decreases in percent body fat, fat mass, weight, BMI, while maintaining lean body mass and improving performance. Interesting. So we're seeing in all these different avenues, performance be the same or improve. And I like this quote here too. Dietary carbohydrate restriction as the first approach in diabetes management. The benefits of carbohydrate restriction in diabetes are immediate and well documented, and dietary carbohydrate restriction reliably reduces high blood glucose and leads to the reduction or elimination of medication. If we were following a ketogenic diet, especially if you're type 2 diabetic, you would have no further need for insulin and probably no need for oral glycemic or oral medications like the metformin. And this is just a great slide by Paoli. This is 5 years old now, but you can see the number of disease states that are being affected by ketogenic diets. And now there's some new ones. I mean, not only neurological disease, you look at Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but migraines I would throw up here now. and the list keeps growing. This is someone I worked with down in Brazil. She's a nutritionist and psychologist, and she had PCOS, and again, dramatically improved symptoms, normalized menses, reduced depression, improved hair growth, and reduced migraines. So ketogenic diet in the brain, we know that there is a level of insulin resistance in the brain when you have traumatic brain injury. Think of concussions. In that area of the insult of the concussion, there is insulin resistance. And basically, you're in a situation of insufficient cellular energy. And while there's insulin resistance, which is the same situation as Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes, that there is no ketone resistance. So you can take ketones up for fuel. The brain can use those for fuel even in these situations of trauma. And this insufficient cellular energy state is mitochondrial dysfunction. So that's where you're hearing this a lot about how important the mitochondria is. Ketones bypass the secondary complex of the mitochondria to generate energy. So you're not in that state of insufficient cellular energy that you see, like not only a lot of these disease states, but a lot of autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, are related to insufficient cellular energy. So again, Alzheimer's disease, this is really interesting. Basically, the higher the blood BHB, and this is from MCT treatment, the improvement was seen with paragraph recall. So basically, the brain is functioning better the higher the blood BHB with people that have Alzheimer's disease. And you're also seeing, as BHB is elevated, that the amyloid plaques are going down. Same with Parkinson's. Maybe you guys have seen videos, maybe you guys have seen people in person, but literally people that have, gross motor issues and even fine motor issues that, it's an issue with Parkinson's with these, it's a dopamine issue with these movement disorders, and in 28 days, they improved their Parkinson's symptoms by 43%. So this is me and Dr. Dom D'Agostino. I'm sure you guys all know him. But his thoughts on cancer, I don't know if you guys have seen the TED Talk with Dom, but it's phenomenal. It really started a firestorm and got him on Tim Ferriss and all kinds of things. This is amazing. So this is a rat that has metastatic cancer. And you see it's just ate up, right? Ketogenic diet plus ketone esters, ketogenic diet plus ketone esters and hyperbaric oxygen chamber. We're not hearing about this. We're not seeing this as treatments. There's no cancer in this mouse. But we're just hearing about radiation and chemotherapy. So this is a personal client that I had, stage 4 glioblastoma multiforme, brain cancer. And she was taken off radiation and chemotherapy, given 6 weeks to live. And 6 weeks later, after me working with her, this is what happened. This is her text. Tumor has shrunk 80 to 90%. Praise the Lord and thank you. I will continue to do what you have told me. And I said, this happened in about 4 weeks of us talking, you doing the diet. This was a death sentence, an incurable disease. And I said, at no point, no one told you about the ketogenic diet? Not even when they pulled you off everything? Like, really? She said, yes, no one but you. Thank you so much. This is what I had her on, the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, IV vitamin C, ketogenic diet, exogenous ketones and C8 MCTs, and then PQQ and CoQ10, which are good for mitochondrial health. And it's just frustrating that that's where we're at. So many people are dying. Chemotherapy is just poison. I'm not saying that there's not certain times that it might not be called for, but chemotherapy is $50,000 a round. This is free. You tell me why it's not being promoted. So, is keto too restrictive? Again, ketogenic.com or the Ketogenic Bible. have great recipes. There's a number of great sites as well. But it's not too restrictive. You know, when I was doing it 20 years ago and I was eating bacon and eggs and sausage and cheese and heavy cream every single day, all day, it was very different than it is now, where you have so many awesome recipes. You have all these great companies like downstairs that are really, it's made it simple. And it's a whole different world now. And eating out, like, it's very easy. Five Guys, bunless burger, Chipotle, salad bowl, Jimmy John's unwich. It's not that hard anymore, right? So all these people that say it's too hard, you know, it gets easier. And I do feel like exogenous ketones, especially this product, are really a great way to get yourself deeper into ketosis. I would experiment with them. I also like the C8 MCTs. They're 3 times better than a regular MCT. And if you feel like the taste or you get some GI distress or whatever with some of these products, I would at least use those C8 MCTs. And I was recently on the On It podcast with Dr. Ryan Lowry. You can check that out on YouTube or Google Play or Stitcher, iTunes. I had Ryan on just a few weeks back on Is the Keto Diet Dangerous? And we went into all these people that are putting out this noise in the media right now. And it was a great episode. Really did a deep dive on that and dispelled a lot of myths. And then I put together the 3 best episodes I've done on keto with the ABCs of the keto diet, biotrustradio.com/keto, or you can find it again on Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes. Great resources. You need peer-reviewed stuff, right? I've got a site, ketogenic.com is amazing, tons of stuff. Ketovangelist obviously is great, and the Ketogenic Bible I highly promote. And I'd like to say thank you. I really appreciate your time, and you can find me at all these different places, ShawnWells.com, and you can email me for this presentation if you want it. I'd be glad to follow up with questions as well. So thank you. Is there any questions?
I heard that if you do the exogenous ketones, that it might make it so that you produce less ketones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's possible. There's not a lot of data on that. That's similar to like if you were to take exogenous testosterone, that your body stops making as much testosterone. It's like a similar idea. But there is some adaptations that would take place at higher levels of ketones that you just can't get otherwise. So maybe there's a trade-off. And if your appetite drops from being on the supplemental ketones, then you're eating less and you're able to get into real ketosis yourself deeper, right? And then at that point, your appetite's less. So it's like, that's something you have to explore with yourself. But I would say that when you're deeper in ketosis and your ketones are higher, that you're upregulating the MCT transporter so you're able to utilize ketones better. So there's certain adaptations that I think would happen more easily by being on the supplement, but there's not a lot of data there.
Yeah, in addition to that, like her ketones are normally like 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So she doesn't need.
You can't, no, that's not true though. You can't go chasing that number. Because there's a level of what I'm saying. You have higher MCT transporters, you're more keto adapted, you're using them more, they're not sticking around in the blood. It's really, you need to go, you can't just use that number. You have to say, how do I feel? How do I feel experientially? Is my appetite lower? Do I feel a little warmer, more thermogenic? Do I have clarity of thought? You can't just chase that number. It's relevant early on, but it might not be as relevant later on. And maybe Volek's glucose ketone ratio might help a little bit more. But just looking at that blood BHB number, it's not that accurate.
So first off, thank you. First off, thank you very much for what you've done and what you continue to do.
Thank you.
You've had the opportunity to talk to thousands of people. Some of what you say sticks.
Yeah.
Some of it just is Teflon. If you had could look back in your history and find 3 sentences that tend to stick, what would those be?
That's a really good question. That's a phenomenal question. I'm thinking about that. One, I would say that I would bring up the ketosis versus ketoacidosis thing. That's very frustrating to me. I would also mention that a low-carb diet is not a ketogenic diet. And if you felt like crap, you probably weren't on a true ketogenic diet and promoting high enough ketones. So that's a frustration for some. And that also resolves that whole, I had abnormal menstruation, I had headaches, I had, dehydration, I had all these things. They're kind of like stuck in this neither world for a long time. And they're just not doing things that would promote ketosis as well. So I would tell them that you probably weren't on a ketogenic diet if you weren't feeling great. It's just something that comes to mind.
Thank you. That was excellent. Do you do anything differently with people that are genetically having difficulty with lipolysis, so if they have the ApoA2 gene?
That's tough. That's actually Victoria Adelis, I think, has that same thing, right? Yeah, that's unique. So you have to really be creative with the fats you're using and have a higher reliance on things like MCTs. That's a super unique scenario. And you would want to avoid saturated fat in that case. But yeah, that's going to take some work and exploration, I think, and definitely doing a lot of blood work. So yeah, it's a great question. But Victoria is the person to ask. Victoria Adelis. Is she here? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the other question I have, or the question I have is, even though you've done like the research and stuff, and we see with the cancer patients and et cetera, in your personal practice, have you ever seen the ketogenic diet help reverse or stabilize someone with lupus? And if so, what is your recommendations for them?
Yeah, so almost all the autoimmune conditions, of which I have some that kind of go, I didn't even mention that I have like Hashimoto's, I have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and they're all improved by basically because of that mitochondrial dysfunction thing, that insufficient cellular energy state, that ketones bypass that issue. So it would improve with conditions like lupus, yes. No more questions? Okay, no more questions. I'll take some more, yeah, outside. Speaker room, 117, or outside. All right, thank you very much, I appreciate it.